Sleeping Murder by Agatha Christie. Chapter 11. The Men in Her Life. Miss Marple crossed Sea Parade and walked along Fore Street, turning up the hill by the arcade. The shops here were the old-fashioned ones: a wool and art needlework shop, a confectioner, a Victorian-looking ladies' outfitter and draper, and others of the same kind. Miss Marple looked in the window of the art needlework shop. 2 young assistants were engaged with customers, but an elderly woman at the back of the shop was free. Miss Marple pushed open the door and went in. She seated herself at the counter, and the assistant, a pleasant woman with gray hair, asked, "What can I do for you, madam?" Miss Marple wanted some pale blue wool to knit a baby's jacket. The proceedings were leisurely and unhurried. Patterns were discussed. Miss Marple looked through various children's knitting books, and in the course of it discussed her great-nephews and nieces. Neither she nor the assistant displayed impatience. The assistant had attended to customers such as Miss Marple for many years. She preferred those gentle, gossipy, rambling old ladies to the impatient, rather impolite young mothers who didn't know what they wanted and had an eye for the cheap and showy. "Yes," said Miss Marple, "I think that will be very nice indeed. And I always find stork leg to be so reliable. It really doesn't shrink. I think I'll take an extra 2 ounces. The assistant remarked that the wind was very cold today as she wrapped up the parcel. "Yes, indeed. I noticed it as I was coming up along the front. Dilmouth has changed a good deal. I have not been here for, let me see, nearly 19 years. "Indeed, madam. Then you shall find a lot of changes. The Superb wasn't built then, I suppose, nor the Southview Hotel?" "Oh, no. It was quite a small place. I was staying with friends. A house called St. Catherine's. Perhaps you know it? On the Leahampton Road." But the assistant had only been in Dilmouth a matter of 10 years. Miss Marple thanked her, took the parcel, and went into the draper's next door. Here she selected an elderly assistant again. The conversation ran much on the same lines, to an accompaniment of summer vests. This time, the assistant responded promptly. "That would be Mrs. Findyson's house." Yes, though the friends I knew had it furnished. A Major Halliday and his wife and a baby girl." "Oh, yes, madam. They had it for about a year, I think." "Yes, he was home from India. They had a very good cook. She gave me a wonderful recipe for baked apple pudding, and also, I think, for gingerbread. I often wonder what became of her." "I expect you mean Edith Paget, madam. She's still in Dilmouth. She was in service now, at Windrush Lodge." "Then there were some other people." "The Fanes. A lawyer, I think he was." "Old Mr. Fane died some years ago. Young Mr. Fane, Mr. Walter Fane, lives with his mother. Mr. Walter Fane never married. He's the senior partner now." "Indeed. I had an idea that Mr. Walter Fane had gone to India, tea planting or something." "I believe he did, madam, as a young man, but he came home and went into the firm after about a year or 2. They all do the best business round here. They're very highly thought of. A very nice, quiet gentleman, Mr. Walter Fane. Everyone likes him." "Why, of course," exclaimed Mrs. Marple. "He was engaged to Miss Kennedy, wasn't he? And she broke it off and married Major Halliday." "That's right, madam. She went out to India to marry Mr. Fane, but it seems she changed her mind and married the other gentleman instead." A faintly disapproving note had entered the assistant's voice. Miss Marple leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I was always so sorry for poor Major Halliday. I knew his mother and his little girl. I understand his second wife left him, ran away with someone. A rather flighty type, I'm afraid. Regular flibbertigibbet, she was. And her brother, the doctor, such a nice man. Did my rheumatic knee a world of good." "Whom did she run away with? I never heard." "That I couldn't tell you, madam. Some said it was one of the summer visitors. But I know Major Halliday was quite broken up. He left the place, and I believe his health gave way. Your change, madam." Miss Marple accepted her change and her parcel. "Thank you so much," she said. "I wonder if Edith Paget, did you say? still has that nice recipe for gingerbread. I lost it. Or rather, my careless maid lost it, and I'm so fond of good gingerbread. I expect so, madam. As a matter of fact, her sister lives next door here, married to Mr. Mountford, the confectioner. Edith usually comes on there on her days out, and I'm sure Mrs. Mountford would give her a message. That's a very good idea. Thank you so much for all the trouble you've taken. A pleasure, madam, I assure you. Miss Marple went out into the street. A nice old-fashioned firm, she said to herself, and those vests are really very nice, so it isn't as though I had wasted any money. She glanced at the pale blue enamel watch that she wore pinned to one side of her dress. Just 5 minutes to go before meeting those two young things at the Ginger Cat. I hope they didn't find things too upsetting at the sanatorium. Giles and Gwenda sat together at a corner table at the Ginger Cat. The little black notebook lay on the table between them. Miss Marple came in from the street and joined them. What will you have, Miss Marple? Coffee? Yes, thank you. No, not cakes, just a scone and butter. Giles gave the order, and Gwenda pushed the little black book across to Miss Marple. First you must read that, she said, and then we can talk. It's what he wrote himself when he was at the nursing home. Oh, but first of all, just tell Miss Marple exactly what Dr. Penrose said, Giles. Giles did so. Then Miss Marple opened the little black book, and the waitress brought 3 cups of weak coffee, and a scone and butter and a plate of cakes. Giles and Gwenda did not talk. They watched Miss Marple as she read. Finally, she closed the book and laid it down. Her expression was difficult to read. There was, Gwenda thought, anger in it. Her lips were very tightly pressed together, and her eyes shone very brightly, unusually so considering her age. Yes, indeed, she said. Yes, indeed. Gwenda said, You advised us once, do you remember? Not to go on? I can see why you did, but we did go on, and this is where we've got to. Only now it seems as though we'd got to another place where one could, if one liked, stop. Do you think we ought to stop? Or not? Miss Marple shook her head slowly. She seemed worried, perplexed. I don't know, she said. I really don't know. It might be better to do so, much better to do so, because after this lapse of time there is nothing you can do. Nothing, I mean, of a constructive nature. You mean that after this lapse of time there's nothing we can find out? Asked Giles. Oh no, said Miss Marple. I didn't mean that at all. 19 years is not such a long time. There are people who would remember things, who could answer questions. Quite a lot of people. Servants, for instance. There must have been at least 2 servants in a house at the time, and a nurse, and probably a gardener. It will only take time and a little trouble to find and talk to these people. As a matter of fact, I've found one of them already, the cook. No, it wasn't that. It was more the question of what practical good you can accomplish, and I'd be inclined to say that none. She stopped. And yet, there is a yet. I'm a little slow in thinking things out, but I have a feeling that there is something perhaps not very tangible, that would be worth taking risks for, even that one should take risks for, but I find it difficult to say just what that is. Giles began. It seems to me, and stopped. Miss Marple turned to him gratefully. Gentlemen, she said, always seem to be able to tabulate things so clearly. I'm sure you have thought things out. I have been thinking things out, said Giles, and it seems to me that there are just 2 conclusions one can come to. One is the same as I suggested before. Helen Halliday wasn't dead when Gwenny saw her laying in the hall. She came to and went away with her lover, whoever he was. That would still fit the facts as we know them. It would square with Kelvin Halliday's rooted belief that he had killed his wife, and it would square with the missing suitcase and the clothes and with the note Dr. Kennedy found. But it leaves certain points unaccounted for. It doesn't explain why Kelvin was convinced he strangled his wife in the bedroom. And it doesn't cover the one, to my mind, really staggering question. Where is Helen Halliday now? Because it seems to me against all reason that Helen should never have been heard of or seen again. Grant that the 2 letters she wrote are genuine. What happened after that? Why did she never write again? She was on affectionate terms with her brother. He's obviously deeply attached to her and always has been. He might disapprove of her conduct, but that doesn't mean he expected to never hear from her again. And if you ask me, that point has obviously been worrying Kennedy himself. Let's say he accepted at the time absolutely the story he's told us. His sister's going off and Kelvin's breakdown. But he didn't expect to never hear from his sister again. I think, as the years went on, and he didn't hear, and Kelvin Halliday persisted in his delusion and finally committed suicide, that a terrible doubt began to creep up in his mind. Supposing that Kelvin's story was true, that he actually had killed Helen. There's no word from her, and surely if she had died somewhere abroad, word would have come to him. I think that explains his eagerness when he saw our advertisement. He hoped it might lead to some account of where she was or what she'd been doing. I'm sure it's absolutely unnatural for someone to disappear as completely as Helen seems to have done. That in itself is highly suspicious. I agree with you, said Miss Marple. But the alternative, Mr. Reed? Giles said slowly, I've been thinking out the alternative. It's pretty fantastic, you know, and even rather frightening, because it involves, how can I put it, a kind of malevolence. Yes, said Gwenda, malevolence is just right. Even I think something that isn't quite sane. She shivered. That is indicated, I think, said Miss Marple. You know, there's a great deal of, well, queerness about more than people imagine. I have seen some of it. Her face was thoughtful. There can't be, you see, any normal explanation, said Giles. I'm talking now the fantastic hypothesis that Kelvin Halliday didn't kill his wife, but genuinely thought he had done so. That's what Dr. Penrose, who seems a decent sort of bloke, obviously wants to think. His first impression of Halliday was that here was a man who had killed his wife and wanted to give himself up to the police. Then he had to take Kennedy's word for it that wasn't so he had to perforce to believe that Halliday was a victim of a complex or a fixation or whatever the jargon is. But he didn't really like that solution. He'd had good experience of the type, and Halliday didn't square with it. However, on knowing Halliday better, he became quite genuinely sure that Halliday was not the type of man who would strangle a woman under any provocation. So he accepted the fixation theory, but with misgivings. And that really means that only one theory will fit the case. Halliday was induced to believe that he had killed his wife by someone else. In other words, we've come to X. Going over the facts very carefully, I'd say that hypothesis is at least possible. According to his own account, Halliday came into the house that evening, went into the dining room, took a drink as he usually did, and then went into the next room, saw a note on the desk, and had a blackout. Giles paused, and Miss Marple nodded her head in approval. He went on. Say it wasn't a blackout, that it was simply dope. Knockout drops in the whiskey. The next step is quite clear, isn't it? X strangled Helen in the hall, but afterwards he took her upstairs and arranged her artistically as a crime passioned on the bed, and that's where Kelvin is when he comes to, and the poor devil who may have been suffering from jealousy where she's concerned thinks he's done it. What does he do next? Goes off to find his brother-in-law on the other side of town and on foot. That gives X time to do his next trick, pack up and remove a suitcase of clothes and also remove the body. Though what he did with the body, Giles ended vexedly, beats me completely. It surprises me that you should say that, Mr. Reed, said Miss Marple. I should say that problem would present few difficulties. But please, do go on. Who were the men in her life? Quoted Giles. I saw that in a newspaper as we came back on the train. It set me wondering, because that's really the crux of the matter, isn't it? If there is an X, as we believe, all we know about him is that he must have been crazy about her. Literally crazy about her. And so he hated my father, said Gwenda, and he wanted him to suffer. So that's where we've come up against, said Giles. We know what kind of girl Helen was. He hesitated. Man-mad, supplied Gwenda. Miss Marple looked up suddenly as though to speak, and then stopped. And that she was beautiful. But we've no clue what other men there were in her life besides her husband. There may have been any number. Miss Marple shook her head. Hardly that. She was quite young, you know. But you are not quite accurate, Mr. Reed. We do know something about what you have termed the men in her life. There was the man she was going to marry. Ah, yes, the lawyer chap. What was his name? Walter Fane, said Miss Marple. Yes, but you can't count him. He was out in Malaya or India or somewhere. But was he? He didn't remain a tea planter, you know, Miss Marple pointed out. He came back here and went into the firm, and is now the senior partner. Gwenda exclaimed, Perhaps he followed her back here? He may have done. We don't know. Giles was looking curiously at the old lady. How did you find all this out? Miss Marple smiled apologetically. I've been gossiping a little. In shops and waiting for buses. Old ladies are supposed to be inquisitive. Yes, one can pick up quite a bit of local news. Walter Fane, said Giles thoughtfully. Helen turned him down. That may have wrinkled quite a lot. Did he ever marry? No, said Miss Marple. He lives with his mother. I'm going to tea there at the end of the week. There's someone else we know about too, said Gwenda suddenly. You remember there was someone she got engaged to or entangled with when she left school. Someone undesirable, Dr. Kennedy said. I wonder just why he was undesirable. That's two men, said Giles. Either of them may have had a grudge, may have brooded. Perhaps the first young man may have had some unsatisfactory mental history. Dr. Kennedy could tell us that, said Gwenda. Only it's going to be a little difficult asking him. I mean, it's all very well for me to go along and ask for news of my stepmother who I barely remember, but it's going to take a bit of explaining if I want to know about her early love affairs. It seems rather excessive interest in a stepmother you hardly knew. There are probably other ways of finding out, said Miss Marple. Oh yes, I think with time and patience, we can gather the information we want. Anyway, we've got two possibilities, said Giles. We might, I think, infer a third, said Miss Marple. It would be, of course, a pure hypothesis, but justified, I think, by the turn of events. Gwenda and Giles looked at her in slight surprise. It is just an inference, said Miss Marple, turning a little pink. Helen Kennedy went out to India to marry a young Fane. Admittedly, she was not wildly in love with him, but she must have been fond of him, and quite prepared to spend her life with him. Yet as soon as she gets there, she breaks off the engagement and wires her brother to send her money to get home. Now, why? Changed her mind, I suppose, said Giles. Both Miss Marple and Gwenda looked at him in mild contempt. Of course she changed her mind, said Gwenda. We know that. What Miss Marple means is... Why? I suppose girls do change their minds, said Giles vaguely. Under certain circumstances, said Miss Marple. Her words held all the pointed innuendo that elderly ladies are able to achieve with the minimum of actual statement. Something he did, Giles was suggesting vaguely when Gwenda chipped in sharply. Of course, she said, another man. She and Miss Marple looked at each other with the assurance of those admitted to a Freemasonry from which men were excluded. Gwenda added with certainty, on the boat going out. Propinquity, said Miss Marple. Moonlight on the boat deck, said Gwenda. All that sort of thing. Only it must have been serious, not just a flirtation. Oh yes, said Miss Marple, I think it was serious. If so, why didn't she marry the chap? Demanded Giles. Perhaps he didn't really care for her, Gwenda said slowly, then shook her head. No, in that case I think she would have still married Walter Fane. Oh, of course, I'm being stupid. Married man. She looked triumphantly at Miss Marple. Exactly, said Miss Marple. That's how I should reconstruct it. They fell in love, probably desperately in love. But if he was a married man, with children perhaps, and probably an honorable type, well, that would be the end of it. Only she wouldn't go on and marry Walter Fane, said Gwenda, so she wired her brother and went home. Yes, that all fits. And on the boat home she met my father. She paused, thinking it out. Not wildly in love, she said, but attracted. And then there was me. They were both unhappy, and they consoled each other. My mother told her about my father told her about my mother, and perhaps she told him about the other man. Yes, of course. She flicked over the pages of the diary. I know there was someone. She said as much to me on the boat. Someone she loved and couldn't marry. Yes, that's it. Helen and my father felt they were alike, and there was me to be looked after, and she thought she could make him happy. And she even thought perhaps that she'd be quite happy herself in the end. She stopped, nodded violently at Miss Marple, and said brightly, That's it! Giles was looking exasperated. Really, Gwenda, you make a whole lot of things up and pretend that they actually happened. They did happen. They must have happened. And that gives us a third person for X. You mean the married man? We don't know what he was like. He mayn't have been nice at all. He may have been a little mad. He may have followed her here. You've just placed him as going out to India. Well, people can come back from India, can't they? Walter Fane did. It was nearly a year later. I don't say this man did come back, but I say he's a possibility. You keep harping on who the men were in her life. Well, she's got 3 of them. Walter Fane, and some young man whose name we don't know, and a married man, whom we don't know exists, finished Giles. We'll find out, said Gwenda. Won't we, Miss Marple? With time and patience, said Miss Marple, we may find out a great deal. Now for my contribution. As a result of a very fortunate little conversation in the Drapers today, I have discovered that Edith Paget, who was a cook at St. Catherine's at the time we are interested in, is still in Dilmouth. Her sister is married to a confectioner here. I think it would be quite natural, Gwenda, for you to want to see her. She may be able to tell us a good deal. That's wonderful, said Gwenda. I've thought of something else, she added. I'm going to make a new will. Don't look so grave, Giles. I shall still leave my money to you. But I shall get Walter Fane to do it for me. Gwenda, said Giles, do be careful. Making a will, said Gwenda, is a most normal thing to do. And the line of approach I've thought up is quite good. Anyway, I want to see him. I want to see what he's like, and possibly... She left the sentence unfinished. What surprises me, said Giles, is that no one else answered that advertisement of ours. This Edith Paget, for example. Miss Marple shook her head. People take a long time to make up their minds about a thing like that in these country districts, she said. They're suspicious. They like to think things over.